The 11th century, a time of deep faith and burgeoning change, swept across Europe. Christianity, firmly rooted in the hearts of its people, fueled a powerful desire to make pilgrimages to the Holy Land. Jerusalem, the city of Christ's crucifixion and resurrection, held a profound spiritual allure for Christians. Pilgrims, driven by devotion, embarked on arduous journeys seeking to walk in the footsteps of Jesus and atone for their sins. These journeys, however, were fraught with danger. The rise of the Seljuk Turks, a powerful Muslim force, cast a long shadow over the pilgrimage routes. Tales of pilgrims robbed, attacked, or even killed filtered back to Europe, sparking fear and outrage. The Byzantine Empire, centered in Constantinople, stood as a bastion of Christianity in the East. But by the late 11th century, the empire was reeling. The Seljuk Turks, fierce warriors with a fervent belief in their own destiny, had dealt a series of crushing defeats to the Byzantine armies. In a desperate bid for survival, Emperor Alexios I Komnenos turned westward for aid. He sent envoys to Pope Urban II, pleading for military support against the Turkish onslaught. Urban saw in Alexios's plea an opportunity to assert papal authority and potentially even gain control of Jerusalem. The year is 1095. In the heart of France, a grand council of bishops, abbots and nobles convened in the city of Clermont. Pope Urban II had summoned this assembly for a momentous purpose: to address the pleas of Emperor Alexios and the growing threat to Christendom in the East. Urban II, a shrewd and charismatic leader, saw in this gathering a unique opportunity. He ascended a platform, his papal robes a stark contrast to the sombre attire of the crowd. His words painted a vivid picture of the suffering of their Christian brethren in the East. He implored the assembled crowd to take up arms in defense of their faith. He promised them not only spiritual rewards, but also tangible benefits, the remission of sins and eternal glory in the eyes of God. A hush fell over the crowd as the Pope finished speaking. Then a single voice, filled with fervour and conviction, pierced the silence. Deus vult! Deus vult! God wills it! God wills it! The cry, like a spark to tinder, ignited the assembly. It echoed through the streets of Clermont, reverberating with a potent mix of religious zeal and martial fervour. From the nobles eager to prove their valour on the battlefield to the peasants yearning for a better life, Urban II's message resonated deeply. The First Crusade, a movement unlike any seen before, was born. Across Europe, men and women, young and old, heeded the call. They sewed crosses onto their garments, a visible symbol of their commitment to this holy cause. The first wave of Crusaders, fired by religious zeal and fueled by the fiery sermons of Peter the Hermit, became known as the People's Crusade. Lacking proper leadership, supplies and military discipline, this ragtag army embarked on a journey fraught with peril. They marched eastwards, their numbers swelling with each passing town and village, their spirits buoyed by unwavering faith. Hardship followed hardship. Food and water became scarce and disease ravaged their ranks. The Crusaders, ill-equipped to deal with the challenges, often resorted to plunder and violence to sustain themselves. The People's Crusade, plagued by internal strife and external threats, reached a tragic climax at the Battle of Civitot. The Seljuk Turks ambushed the Crusaders near Nicaea, resulting in a massacre. While the People's Crusade met a tragic end, a more organized and formidable force was gathering in the West. Led by some of the most powerful nobles of Europe, this army, known as the Prince's Crusade, was a force to be reckoned with. Among their ranks were Godfrey of Bouillon, Raymond IV of Toulouse, and Bohemond of Taranto. These leaders commanded well-equipped and disciplined armies. They marched towards Constantinople, their arrival both anticipated and dreaded by Emperor Alexios. The arrival of the Prince's Crusade in Constantinople marked a pivotal moment in the First Crusade. The Crusaders, having crossed vast distances, stood at the gates of Constantinople, a city that shimmered with wealth and grandeur. Emperor Alexios, a shrewd and pragmatic ruler, welcomed the Crusaders cautiously. He provided them with supplies and guides, eager to direct their military might against his Seljuk enemies. However, he also demanded an oath of fealty from the Crusader leaders, seeking to ensure that any territories they conquered from the Turks would be returned to Byzantine control. The Crusaders, wary of the emperor's motives, agreed to his terms, albeit reluctantly. This uneasy alliance would form the backdrop for the next stage of the First Crusade. With the Byzantine Empire at their backs, the Crusaders embarked on the next leg of their perilous journey. Their path led them across the rugged terrain of Anatolia, a land scorched by the sun and fraught with danger. The Seljuk Turks harried the Crusader columns, their arrows a constant threat. The searing heat, coupled with a lack of supplies and clean water, took a heavy toll on the Crusader army. Yet, despite these hardships, the Crusaders pressed on, their faith a beacon in the face of adversity. At Nicaea, the Seljuk capital, the Crusaders laid siege to the city. After a protracted siege, Nicaea fell, a testament to the Crusaders' military prowess. Their victory at Nicaea proved to the Seljuks and the wider Muslim world that the Crusaders were a force to be reckoned with. The Crusaders' advance continued, each victory fueling their belief in their divine purpose. However, their greatest challenge lay ahead, the heavily fortified city of Antioch. The siege of Antioch would prove to be a grueling test of the Crusaders' faith, endurance, and unity. Months turned into a bitter stalemate. The Crusaders, their supplies dwindling and their ranks ravaged by disease and hunger, faced a formidable foe within the city walls. Just when their hopes seemed to dwindle, Bohemond of Taranto forged a secret pact with a disgruntled Armenian guard within the city. Under the cover of darkness, the guard opened a gate, allowing Bohemond and his men to infiltrate Antioch and claim the city. The capture of Antioch breathed new life into the flagging Crusader spirit. With renewed vigour, they set their sights on Jerusalem, the ultimate goal of their sacred quest. As the Crusaders approached Jerusalem, a palpable shift occurred within their ranks. The weariness of the long journey seemed to melt away, replaced by a fervour bordering on ecstasy. Yet mingled with this elation, a palpable fear took root. The stage was set for a confrontation of epic proportions, a clash of faiths that would leave an indelible mark on history. In June of 1099, the Crusaders, their numbers depleted but their resolve unshaken, reached the outskirts of Jerusalem. The sight of the holy city, its walls glinting in the summer sun, sent a collective shiver through their ranks. But standing between them and their sacred goal was a formidable foe, the Fatimid Caliphate. What followed was a siege unlike any other in history, a brutal and bloody affair etched in religious fervour. After weeks of relentless assault, a breach was finally made. On July 15, 1099, the Crusaders stormed through the breach, their cries of Deus Vult echoing through the narrow streets of Jerusalem. What followed was a massacre of horrific proportions. The streets of Jerusalem ran red with blood, a testament to the terrible price of victory. With Jerusalem under their control, the Crusaders established a series of fragile kingdoms in the Holy Land. These Crusader states, carved out of land conquered from Muslims, were intended to be bastions of Christendom in the East. However, the reality of ruling these newly conquered lands proved far more challenging than the Crusaders had anticipated. Surrounded by hostile Muslim neighbors, the Crusader states were in a perpetual state of war. The Crusaders, outnumbered and often at odds with each other, found themselves embroiled in a constant struggle for survival. This fueled resentment and resistance, making it even more difficult for the Crusader states to establish any kind of lasting peace or stability. As the 12th century progressed, a new threat to the Crusader states emerged in the form of a charismatic and brilliant Muslim leader, Saladin. Born into a Kurdish noble family, Saladin rose through the ranks of the Muslim world through a combination of military skill, political acumen, and a reputation for piety and justice. He unified warring Muslim factions under his banner, his ultimate goal, the expulsion of the Crusaders from the Holy Land. Saladin was a formidable adversary, a stark contrast to the often divided and fractious Crusader leaders. He understood the importance of unity and discipline, forging a powerful army bound by faith and a shared purpose. He was also a shrewd strategist, patient and calculating in his approach to warfare. The rise of Saladin cast a long shadow over the Crusader states. He represented a new era in the Crusades, one in which the Muslim world, united and revitalized, would challenge the Crusaders' very presence in the Holy Land. The stage was set for a clash of titans, a confrontation that would determine the fate of Jerusalem and the legacy of the Crusades themselves. The Crusader states, carved out of conquest and clinging to existence, faced a constant barrage of threats. Internally, they grappled with political infighting, cultural clashes, and the ever-present challenges of governing a diverse and often resentful population. Externally, the Seljuk threat, though weakened, had not vanished, and new dangers lurked on the horizon. News filtered back to Europe of the Crusader states' precarious situation, their victories overshadowed by tales of hardship and loss. The fall of Edessa in 1144, the first Crusader state to crumble, sent shockwaves through Christendom. Pope Eugenius III, heeding the pleas for aid, called for a second crusade, a call answered by two of Europe's most powerful monarchs, Louis VII of France and Conrad III of Germany. The second crusade, however, proved to be a costly failure. Beset by logistical nightmares, internal divisions, and a series of military blunders, the Crusader armies were decimated before even reaching the Holy Land. Louis VII and Conrad III, their dreams of glory shattered, returned to Europe in disgrace. The Second Crusade, far from bolstering the Crusader states, exposed their vulnerability and the waning enthusiasm for large-scale crusading ventures. The Muslim world, emboldened by the Crusaders' failures, grew more unified and determined in its opposition to the Crusader states. The stage was set for the rise of a leader who would come to define an era Saladin. The year 1187 marked a turning point in the history of the Crusades. Saladin, his forces united and his strategy honed, launched a brilliant campaign against the Crusader states, culminating in the Battle of Hattin. The Crusader army, led by the ailing King Guy of Jerusalem, was utterly routed, a defeat so catastrophic that it sent shockwaves through Christendom. Jerusalem, the jewel of the Crusader states and the epicenter of Christian pilgrimage, fell to Saladin's forces soon after. Unlike the bloodbath that had accompanied the First Crusade's conquest of the city, Saladin's forces showed restraint, allowing for the orderly evacuation of Christian inhabitants in exchange for ransoms. The fall of Jerusalem sparked outrage and despair throughout Europe. Pope Gregory VIII called for a new crusade, this time led by three of Europe's most powerful monarchs, Richard I of England, Philip II of France, and Frederick I, Holy Roman Emperor. This third crusade, unlike its predecessor, would pit titans against each other, seasoned commanders vying for control of the Holy Land. Richard I, known as Richard the Lionheart, emerged as the dominant figure of the Third Crusade. A skilled military leader and a charismatic, if ruthless, figure, Richard secured a string of victories against Saladin's forces, recapturing key coastal cities like Acre. Despite their battlefield successes, the Third Crusade ultimately failed to achieve its primary objective, the recapture of Jerusalem. Richard, recognizing the near impossibility of holding the city even if he could take it, negotiated a truce with Saladin. The Treaty of Jaffa, signed in 1192, allowed for Muslim control of Jerusalem, but guaranteed Christian pilgrims access to the city. The image of Richard the Lionheart, locked in a struggle for the Holy Land against Saladin, captured the imagination of Christendom. Yet, interwoven with these tales is a darker chapter, the Children's Crusade. In 1212, a young shepherd named Nicholas of Cologne claimed to have received a divine vision to lead a crusade of children to the Holy Land. Thousands of children, captivated by his message, flocked to his banner. They abandoned their homes, blinded by youthful idealism. The journey was catastrophic. They faced hunger, disease, and exploitation. Many died, their dreams shattered by harsh realities. The promised miracle never materialized. The Children's Crusade remains a tragic reminder of the human cost of religious fanaticism. By the turn of the 13th century, the Crusades had strayed far from their original purpose. The capture of Jerusalem seemed increasingly like a distant dream. Political machinations and economic opportunism poisoned the well of crusading zeal. Nowhere was this more evident than in the Fourth Crusade, which descended into greed and violence. Initiated by Pope Innocent III, it aimed to recapture Jerusalem, but financial difficulties led to a fateful detour. The Crusaders, indebted to the Venetians, seized the Christian city of Zara. This act of aggression shocked many, but the worst was yet to come. Under Venetian influence, the Crusaders sailed to Constantinople. The Byzantine Empire became the target of the Fourth Crusade's wrath. In 1204, the Crusaders besieged and captured Constantinople, unleashing a torrent of violence upon the city. Churches and palaces were looted and burned. The Byzantine Empire was left in ruins, its legacy tarnished. The Fourth Crusade marked a turning point in the history of the Crusades, exposing the cynicism and corruption that had come to infect these holy wars. It also dealt a fatal blow to the Byzantine Empire, leaving a power vacuum with far-reaching consequences. While the focus of this exploration has been on the Crusades to the Holy Land, it's crucial to acknowledge that the crusading spirit, with its potent mix of religious zeal and martial fervour, found expression in other corners of the medieval world. In the Iberian Peninsula, the Reconquista, the centuries-long struggle between Christian kingdoms and Muslim rulers, often took on a crusading character. Christian knights from across Europe flocked to Iberia, eager to fight for God and glory. Their swords aimed at driving back Muslim rule and reclaiming lands once part of Christendom. Further north in the Baltic region, the Northern Crusades pitted Teutonic knights and their allies against pagan Baltic tribes. Driven by a mix of religious zeal, territorial ambition, and economic incentives, these crusades resulted in the forced conversion and subjugation of Baltic peoples, shaping the religious and political landscape of the region for centuries to come. These echoes of the Crusades, though geographically and culturally distinct from the wars in the Holy Land, highlight the far-reaching influence of the crusading movement. The concept of holy war, sanctioned by the papacy and fueled by a potent mix of faith and ambition, found fertile ground in various corners of the medieval world, shaping destinies and leaving lasting legacies. By the late 13th century, the Crusader states, once symbols of Christian dominance in the Holy Land, were crumbling under the relentless pressure of resurgent Muslim forces. Internal divisions, dwindling support from Europe, and the constant drain on resources had taken their toll. In 1291, the Mamluks of Egypt, a powerful military caste, captured Acre, the last major Crusader stronghold. The fall of Acre marked the end of the Crusader states, their 2-century-long experiment in cross-cultural rule coming to a definitive and bloody close. The Crusader states, though ultimately ephemeral, left an indelible mark on the history of the Middle East and Europe. They had facilitated trade, cultural exchange, and the transmission of knowledge, albeit often intertwined with violence and exploitation. They had also sown the seeds of bitterness and mistrust between Christians and Muslims, a legacy that continues to resonate in the modern world. The Crusader states, for all their flaws and ultimate failure, stand as a testament to the enduring power of faith, the allure of conquest, and the enduring human capacity for both great and terrible deeds. Their story, a complex tapestry of triumphs and tragedies, continues to fascinate and provoke, reminding us of the enduring power of the past to shape the present. The clash of civilizations that defined the Crusades, though rooted in religious fervor and territorial ambition, had unintended consequences that would reshape the medieval world. One of the most significant of these was the dramatic expansion of trade networks linking East and West. For 2 centuries, the Crusader states, precariously perched on the edge of the Islamic world, served as conduits for the flow of goods, ideas, and cultural influences. European merchants, their appetites whetted by the luxuries of the East, established trading posts in cities like Acre, Tyre, and Tripoli. Spices such as pepper, cinnamon, and cloves, once rare and exorbitantly expensive in Europe, became more common, transforming culinary tastes and fueling a growing demand for Eastern goods. Silks, carpets, and ceramics from the Islamic world, prized for their beauty and craftsmanship, found their way into the homes of European nobles and wealthy merchants, symbols of status and exotic allure. This burgeoning trade was not a one-way street. European merchants, eager to secure these Eastern treasures, traded wool, timber, and metals, goods highly sought after in the Islamic world. This exchange of goods, driven by economic necessity and fueled by growing demand, fostered closer ties between East and West, albeit often strained by religious and political tensions. The Crusades, though primarily military ventures, had a profound impact on the intellectual landscape of Europe. The contact between the Latin West and the Islamic East, however fraught with conflict, led to a rediscovery of classical knowledge and a surge of intellectual curiosity that would lay the groundwork for the Renaissance. The Islamic world during the Middle Ages had preserved and expanded upon the scientific and philosophical works of ancient Greece and Rome, works largely lost or forgotten in Western Europe. Through their interactions with Muslim scholars, European crusaders and travelers encountered these lost treasures of classical thought. Arabic translations of Aristotle, Euclid, and Ptolemy, along with groundbreaking works by Islamic thinkers like Avicenna and Averroes, made their way back to Europe, sparking a renewed interest in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. Universities, those crucibles of intellectual ferment, were founded across Europe, fueled in part by this influx of new ideas. The Crusades, though often driven by religious dogma, inadvertently fostered a spirit of inquiry and a thirst for knowledge that would help to chip away at the intellectual constraints of the medieval world, paving the way for the Renaissance's embrace of human reason and the rediscovery of classical thought. The Byzantine Empire, that venerable bastion of Eastern Christianity, had stood as a bulwark against Islamic expansion for centuries. Yet the Crusades, ironically intended to aid the Byzantines, dealt them a blow from which they would never fully recover. The Fourth Crusade's sack of Constantinople in 1204, a betrayal of epic proportions, shattered the empire's unity and prestige. The once mighty city, stripped of its wealth and its spirit broken, became a shadow of its former self. Though the Byzantines managed to re-establish control of Constantinople in 1261, the empire remained fractured and weakened, its territories diminished, its treasury depleted. This weakening of the Byzantine Empire had profound consequences for the region. It created a power vacuum that would be filled by rising powers like the Ottoman Turks, who would ultimately conquer Constantinople in 1453, marking the definitive end of the Byzantine Empire. The Crusades, intended to bolster Christendom's eastern flank, had inadvertently hastened its demise, reshaping the political landscape of the eastern Mediterranean for centuries to come. The Crusades, initiated and sanctioned by the papacy, had a profound impact on the Catholic Church itself. In the short term, the Crusades bolstered papal prestige and authority. Popes, wielding the power to call for holy war, could mobilize the resources of Christendom, directing armies and influencing the political landscape of Europe. However, the Crusades also sowed the seeds of discontent and dissent. The Church's involvement in warfare, often brutal and driven by worldly ambitions, tarnished its spiritual authority in the eyes of some. The Fourth Crusade's attack on Constantinople, a Christian city, sparked outrage and accusations of corruption within the Church hierarchy. Moreover, the Crusades, though initially successful in mobilizing Christendom, ultimately exposed the limits of papal power. Kings and princes, increasingly assertive of their own authority, often pursued their own agendas in the East, at times defying papal directives. The failure of later crusades to achieve their objectives further eroded papal prestige, contributing to a growing sense of disillusionment with crusading ideals. The Crusades, those tumultuous centuries of holy war, cast a long shadow over history. They were a complex and often contradictory phenomenon, driven by a potent mix of religious fervour, political ambition, economic opportunism, and a thirst for adventure. They left in their wake a trail of bloodshed, conquest, and cultural exchange, forever altering the relationship between East and West. The Crusades ultimately failed to achieve their primary objective, the permanent Christian control of the Holy Land. Yet, they had a profound and lasting impact on the course of history, reshaping trade routes, sparking an intellectual awakening in Europe, contributing to the decline of the Byzantine Empire, and transforming the papacy's role in medieval society. The Crusades, though often romanticized or demonized, defy easy categorization. They were a product of their time, reflecting the beliefs, ambitions, and anxieties of the medieval world. Their legacy, complex and often contested, continues to resonate in the 21st century, a reminder of the enduring power of faith, the allure of conquest, and the human capacity for both great and terrible deeds. The Crusades stand as a towering monument to the complexities of human history. They were not simply a series of religious wars, as the simplistic narrative often suggests, but a confluence of motivations, ambitions, and fears that played out on a grand stage. For centuries, the very word Crusades has evoked powerful emotions, images of valiant knights, pious pilgrims, and bloody conquests. Yet, the true legacy of the Crusades is far more nuanced, a tapestry woven from threads of faith and fanaticism, courage and cruelty, innovation and destruction. The Crusades were, without question, fueled by a fervent religious zeal. The belief that God had ordained the conquest of the Holy Land, that earthly sins could be absolved through acts of martial piety, resonated deeply within the medieval psyche. Yet, to view the Crusades solely through a religious lens is to ignore the intricate interplay of other forces at work. Political ambitions, personal vendettas, economic opportunism, and even a thirst for adventure all played a part in propelling these great movements of people across continents. Kings sought to expand their domains, knights yearned for glory and riches, merchants saw opportunities for profit, and the Church, ever ambitious, sought to expand its influence and authority. The Crusades were, in many ways, a crucible in which the forces shaping medieval society were tested and transformed. They accelerated the decline of the Byzantine Empire, reshaped the political landscape of Europe, and fostered the growth of trade and intellectual exchange between East and West. Yet they also left behind a legacy of violence, religious intolerance, and cultural misunderstanding, the echoes of which continue to resonate in the modern world. The Crusades, though a product of a bygone era, hold enduring relevance for us today. They remind us of the power of belief to shape human actions, for both good and ill. The Crusades highlight the dangers of religious extremism and the ease with which faith can justify violence. History is a complex tapestry woven from the choices and actions of countless individuals. To understand the Crusades, we must delve into the motivations and fears of those who lived through them. We must see Crusaders as complex human beings shaped by their time. Recognize the humanity of those who bore the brunt of Crusader violence: Muslims, Jews, and Eastern Christians. The Crusades continue to cast a long shadow over the relationship between the Islamic world and the West. The lessons we draw from this period shape our understanding of the present and influence the future. We must approach the study of the Crusades with nuance, empathy, and a willingness to grapple with complexities. Only then can we learn from past mistakes and build a future free from religious intolerance and violence.